Hi guys, so we're almost nearing the end of our beginner series. I'm going to be talking about arrays and lists today. We have, I think, two more videos in this explainer video series where I'm trying to address all of the concepts of C# programming because once we're done with this, we're really going to start going headfirst into coding like professionals. I'm going to start using some of these terms freely without explaining too much. I'm hoping you're still able to follow along, but we're getting to the point where we need to kind of, grow in our programming a little bit so that we're able to focus on more complex things like, solving problems. So the beginner series, I know that for some of you, you already know all of these things. I only have about two more videos left, and then we're going to go right back into hardcore coding. So this is an opportunity for you if you're a complete beginner to get caught up, but if you're already experienced, hang in there. I'm already working on the next content where we will actually delve into some hardcore programming. So let's get into the topic for today. Today, we're going to be looking at arrays and lists. So in the last two videos, we talked about variables, which are items that are able to store values. Well, a variable is able to store just one value, but an array is able to store multiple values. So let's say a variable of income is storing the value of 5,000. So anytime we want to refer to a person's income, we will call on the variable income, and the value that that would return to us is 5,000. An array is able to store a series of values. So you want to store, let's say, the income of your entire team from your manager to the least person in the office. You would store that in an array. Now, the syntax for an array is the data type with two square brackets, the array name, and then the equal to, which is the assignment operator, and then a list of your values separated by commas and covered in curly brackets. You can create arrays of any size. Your array can be as small as a list of the salary of people on a small team, or as large as a database of the cost of goods and services on a website like, let's say, Amazon. So for an array of strings, let's say we're trying to collect a series of Revit object names and we want to store them as strings. For those of you who are just joining, a string is any text-based character, so literally any word, and it's usually covered in parentheses. So anytime you see a string in single parentheses or double parentheses, that's how you know it's a text versus maybe naming a variable or something else in the code. Whenever you see text wrapped in those parentheses, it is a string. It's a data type similar to an integer or a boolean or any of the other data types we covered in the last video. But today we're going to be looking at arrays, so let's focus on that. So this is an array of strings. So for each string, it's wrapped in parentheses, separated by commas to know its position on the array, and wrapped in curly brackets. So if you've ever used Dynamo, you've probably seen something like this, where it's a list of numbers or data types in Dynamo. Now, it has the same principle where there's something in programming called the indices, where the first item is index 0, and the other items are index 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So if I ever wanted to call on wall and I did some kind of algorithm that's looking at index 0, it will know that I'm referring to wall. If I did the same thing and I said I want index 1, it will know that I'm referring to door. So let's say you're trying to work on an array and you're looking for the fifth item. That would actually be on index 4 and not index 5. To simplify this a little bit, we'll look at lists. So lists are very, very similar to arrays. However, a list is something you can manipulate. You can add to a list, you can delete from a list. So you use a list instead of an array when you're trying to do more manipulations down the line. The syntax for list is list, literally the word list, and then the data type in this sort of greater than, less than bracket situation. So if it's an integer or a string, you put that there. The list name, this is where you're now naming the list. So think of the list almost like also a variable. The list part is just how you would call it in C#. And then the list name is you now naming that variable. And then you have new list. So the operator is equal to sign as usual. list data type list name is equal to new list, the data type again. So that's repeating from the first part. And then your comma separated values in curly brackets. So there's something we're seeing for the first time here, which is the new keyword. And this is something we're going to be discussing a little bit more. So this is an example of a list of numbers. Let's say the width of columns we have on our project. You'd have list keyword, the integer, which is the data type, the name of the list, and then the new keyword, list integer again, and then the curly brackets. I promise you, it seems like a lot, but the thing with C# is just that there's a lot of repetition. If this were a simpler programming language like Python, all you'd have to do is just say width of columns is equal to curly brackets and then your list. But because it's C#, they do this thing where you kind of have to be very explicit about what you're trying to create and what data type you're trying to create. I have a strong feeling that's why it's a bit faster than some of the newer programming languages like Python, because there's less work for the computer to figure out what you're trying to do. But it's just nature of C#. There's a lot of repetition. It doesn't really mean that it's more complex. It's just more words. And I hope that kind of doesn't scare you away. So what is this new keyword, right? So we talked about object-oriented programming in our very first video, and this is something called object instantiation. So we've talked about how the object is derived from a class. Now we want to call one object out of a class. So if you watch the first video, we gave an example of what it looks like to define a blueprint for a object in a class and then calling that object. So when you want to instantiate a new object where you're creating the object for the first time, in C# you would achieve this using the new keyword. It calls on the constructor method of that specified type and creates memory for the new object. So it's like your first time introducing that object into your code. Instantiation means really like if you're working in Revit and you want to draw a wall for the first time, that is instantiating the wall object from your element category class. That's just a rough example of what this means. But basically, you're calling your object for the first time. That's all the new keyword means. You're calling a constructor method, which is something we're going to be looking at in our next video. We're going to be looking at methods and what are the different types. And once we're done with methods and a few other syntax rules here and there, we're ready really to start coding. For every other sort of theoretical thing we need to know, we're going to learn it while coding, and I think it will be a lot easier that way, because a lot of these concepts really become very clear as soon as you start to really get hands-on experimenting with examples. That's all for today's video. You've been such a great sport so far. Thank you for following up to this point. Let me know if there's something you'd like me to change about these videos. I mean, I'm not making them for myself, right? I'm making them for you. So if there's something you'd prefer I said, explained, discussed, change the format a little bit, just let me know. I'm really happy to work on the videos and make them better. Please subscribe as usual. It really does help me a lot to have more subscribers. I'm kind of starting out newly, as you can tell, so the more people that kind of reinforce that this is a good channel, the better my chances for success. Thank you so much, and I'm really glad you've been around. We're almost there. We're almost at the finish line. Please don't stop your coding journey. It might seem tricky, but if I can learn it, trust me, you can learn it too. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.